y'all. Happy Friday. So, I'm continuing in my class today, and this is titled From Subjects to Citizens, a brief timeline of the founding of the United States from 1764 to 1776. So, this is a very short period of time in the history, okay? So, it says sources of conflict between Britain and the colonies. The Seven Years' War between France and Britain set the stage for the American Revolution and the transformation of the Americans from subjects to citizens. The war left Britain needing revenue, which pushed it to tax the colonies. I didn't know that that's what that was about. Um, so the Boston Tea Party, um, that's this is what led to that. Okay. It also laid a foundation for further conflict between the colonists and the indigenous people. I didn't know that. Want more detail? Well, the Treaty of Paris in 1763 ended the Seven Years' War between France and Britain, but British colonists and indigenous peoples continued to fight over access to land. During the Seven Years' War, several native groups, including the Iroquois Confederacy, never heard of it. I never heard of it. The Iroquois Confederacy had allied with and fought alongside the British with the understanding that if the British won, they would return lands that had been stolen from the Six Nations by the French. Now, this is what I said in the earlier part of the lesson. There were questions that Professor Allen wanted us to reflect and respond on. See, what would you do? So it's saying it's November 1775. You are a young free woman of color living in a free community of formerly enslaved Africans and indigenous Americans located in the Great Dismal Swamp of the coastal plain region of southeastern Virginia. After many endeavors and journeys from your starting point in New York, you have at last found and been reunited with your father. You've been assisted on your journeys and searched by the Sons of Liberty and their cross colonial communications networks. You have sometimes dressed as a young man and ferried messages for them. Now news has reached the Great Dismal Swamp that the British Royal Governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, has proclaimed that any enslaved person who reaches British troops and agrees to fight with the British will receive their freedom. The swamp is full of debate about whether to go or not. Your father wants to join the British, however, you are unsure. So reflect and respond. What 2 to 3 questions will you need answers to make your decisions? So this is my questions. Do I really want to be free? Am I willing to die for my freedom? And what if the British are lying? How do you trust these people, right? So, and going over this war between the British and the French, and then them needing money, and so they taxed the colonists, right? So here we go with the indigenous part of it, which I didn't know anything about, right? The Iroquois Confederacy had allied with and fought alongside the British with the understanding that if the British won, they would return lands that had been stolen from the Six Nations by the French. But as one Iroquois spokesman told the British commander in chief in North America after the war, instead of restoring to us our lands, we see you in possession of them and building more forts in many parts of our country. In addition to British troops, squatters and land speculators continued to push westward. With the proclamation of 1763, imperial officers tried to bar colonial settlement on lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. Matters came to a head during Pontiac's Rebellion, a pan Indian resistance effort against British colonization that involved several indigenous groups, including the Ottawa, Delaware, Shawnee, Choctaw, and others, who attacked British outposts across the Great Lakes and Ohio River Valley. After 3 years of fighting, the conflict ended in a stalemate, but it forced imperial officials to rethink their Indian policy. Despite the efforts of British lawmakers, many of whom took native grievances seriously, colonists continued moving west, and hostilities with indigenous peoples continued. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, restrictions on access to native lands imposed by British authorities angered rebel colonists. The issue would later appear as a grievance in the Declaration of Independence. In addition, the expense of the war itself and the continued fighting led Britain to look for new sources of revenue and inspired a period of aggressive efforts to tax colonies. Did you know this? I didn't know none of this, okay? So here we go. 1764, taxation without representation. Sugar Act passed. The Americans found that I thought it was about tea. Oh my God. The Americans found that questions of taxation and economic policy mattered to them and sparked resistance to British authority. The first move in the British effort to draw revenue from the colonies was the Sugar Act. Want more detail? Well, sugar was considered a luxury commodity in the 18th century. The majority of sugar cane during this period was harvested by enslaved laborers in the West Indies, okay, especially Jamaica and Barbados, and shipped across the British Empire. According to the Navigation Acts, a series of laws dating back to the 17th century that governed the British imperial economy, colonists were barred from trading certain goods. Man, Britain got a lot of nerve, boy. A lot of nerve. Talk about control freaks. So it says colonists were barred from trading certain goods, including sugar, with foreign countries unless a tax was paid. Because it was so lucrative, many colonists resorted to smuggling. Well, ain't nothing new with that. Colonial merchants continued to buy and sell goods with French, Spanish, and Dutch traders, especially if prices were more favorable for the same goods in British markets. With the Sugar Act, British legislators attempted to end this illicit trade, which had existed for decades, flourishing in the Caribbean, and had become an acute problem during, during and after the Seven Years' War. In addition to modifying taxes on molasses, the act also listed more goods to be taxed in order to raise revenue from the colonies. God, man, does it sound familiar? Does our current tax situation um, does it shed any light on our current taxation situation, especially with us having to pay taxes in 2 months for the individual? Companies pay quarterly, 4 times a year. So this says um, the act also listed more goods to be taxed in order to raise revenue from the colonies, including sugar, certain wines, coffee, pimento, lumber, and iron. With strict enforcement, the Sugar Act immediately led to a decline in rum production and consumption in the colonies. The situation disrupted the colonial economy by reducing the number of foreign markets to which the colonies could sell, the amount of currency available to them from the purchase of British manufactured goods. It just seems one sided. Take, 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 take. What were the British giving to the colonies? Mm, 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 mm. It's a shame and a scandal, honey. When the colonists reached the point of deciding to revolt from Britain, they believed they needed to spell out their reasons. In fact, when the Continental Congress passed a resolution, it would appoint a committee to provide a preamble that would lay out their justification. They considered it important to spell out the values motivating their decisions as a matter of routine practice. Their civic identity included a commitment to providing reasons for their actions. So we have the preamble to the Constitution, right? We, the people of the United States of America, right? On June 11th, 1776, the Continental Congress instructed Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and Robert Livingston of New York, collectively known as the Committee of Five, to draft the structure and substance of the Declaration. The committee chose Jefferson to compose the document. Okay? Remember, Thomas Jefferson is from Virginia. He consulted closely with Adams and Franklin. While Thomas Jefferson was the scribe, the intellectual case of the Declaration was crafted significantly by Adams and Franklin. On July 2nd, after officially declaring the United Colonies to be free and independent states, Congress resolved itself into a committee of the whole to read and edit the committee's draft Declaration of Independence. Members rewrote, removed, and corrected several sections of this draft. No official record of these proceedings survives, except the final revised document. In the end, after a quarter of the committee's draft was removed, that's a lot. That's a fourth, right? In several places, the Committee of the Whole softened the draft's language and made it less radical. In making their case, the members of Congress used the vocabulary of rights, safety, and happiness. They argued depend on governments that secure rights. Okay. Okay, so their safety and happiness depends on governments that secure rights. This is just blatant compared to what we're going through right now politically, right? Where they're trying to take our government representatives of a certain party are trying to remove those rights instead of secure them. Let's keep going. They provided examples of the rights to be secured: life, liberty, and happiness. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? They also had specific complaints. Britain was violating their rights to trial by jury, to freedom from arbitrary military interference, and to participate in representative government, for instance. But in addition to this rights based argument, the colonists were also narrating a story of self. They were sharing with the world what mattered to them and why, what was wrong with their world, and how they proposed to bring a change. They were change makers. As we read the Declaration of Independence, we have a chance to understand both the philosophy of rights and the components of civic agency. Whew, okay. So, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, this is the Declaration of Independence, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So this is like a divorce decree. I want a divorce. Okay. We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws for immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, so to keep people from coming, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount of payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial for punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, suspending our own legislatures, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Let me tell you something. As a black person, I see the hypocrisy because they were against the king doing this to them, yet they are doing this to the citizens of America right now. All of them. It doesn't matter if you're black, it doesn't matter if you're white, it doesn't matter if you're Hispanic. They just running all over all of us, y'all. And it's very hypocritical. They're doing the exact same thing that the king did to the colonists back in the 1700s. Anyway, it goes on. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, destroyed the lives of our people. Oh my God. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brothers, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has he has excited domestic insurrections among us. January 6th, baby, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Notice the black people ain't mentioned. So called African Americans, black, Negroes, coloreds are not mentioned in this. Indian savages is what they saying. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnim- magnanimity. This is misspelled. Um, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of injustice. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies of war and peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in general, Congress, assemble, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. That is the Declaration of Independence. Okay? All the other things that you've seen is where this declaration has had amendments to it. Okay? Um, and so that's why you hear the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. All of these are amendments to this original document, which is not that long. And yeah, this is a mess, y'all. This is a mess. It's almost like they wrote this Declaration of Independence, and by every by their actions, their deeds, their intentions, they devolved into the very thing of which they wanted to sever ties with. They have become the thing that they wanted no parts of. Interesting. So that was that, y'all. Um, so I got a lesson to do. Now, your next step is to explore the civic journey traveled by the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Okay. Our goal here is to understand the signers themselves as change makers. They were they were change makers of the day, right? I think that what mattered to them was what they said. They what mattered to them, number one, to them was safety, happiness, and representation. And there were other things too that they were saying. Um, they had a lot of complaints, which is interesting because they always say that black people complain. No matter what you do for black people, they always gonna be complaining, right? Here, let's see. Okay, so justice, uh, fairness, uh, taxing us without our consent, cutting off our trade. So this was three, oh, four. So trade, justice, um, trumped up charges, that's for sure. Um, they were burned out of their places. Um, they were um, they were concerned that the British government was waging war against them, um, plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Cha, mercenaries against them. That's the CIA, ain't it? Domestic insurrections among us. Mm-mm. The same old stuff being used to this very day. The U.S. government does right now. Ugh. Question two. What did they want to share with whom and why? What did they want to share? I have no idea. Um, um, they were calling him a tyrant. What did they wanted to share? They wanted to share equality, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so what did they want to share? They wanted to share among themselves equality, peace, justice, um, happiness, and commerce. Okay. How did they make their cause about more than themselves? They were saying that they had rights by God. They used the terminology all men, all men, right? All men are created equal and have these rights, are created equal and have definite rights by God. Okay. Where did they start? Well, they started with the preamble, right? Um, before they did the declaration, they actually had the preamble, right? Um, they started by spelling out their reasons for the dissolution. Okay, that's how they started out. They started out with listing their complaints against the um, King of England in the preamble. Okay, how did they make it easy and engaging for others to join in? They held a Congress, they held a meeting inviting representatives from all 13 colonies, right? Let's verify that because I know they have a name for it. They're so formal. Um, the Continental Congress passed a resolution. It would appoint a committee to provide a preamble that that laid out their justification for their decision to revolt and sever ties with Britain. Um, so that's how they started out. All right. Continental Congress passed a resolution. Okay. So let's do that. Continental Congress, step one. Okay. Step 1. Okay. The Continental Congress passed a resolution. Okay. Then, step 2. Um, they appointed a committee to provide a preamble. Okay. Okay. How did they get the whole community involved? Okay, let's see. Let's do this. Step 2. Appointed a committee to provide a preamble. Okay. And how did they get wisdom from crowds? Well, I'm gonna just submit those two. They got wisdom from the crowds. Um, I want to know the exact verbiage for how they did that because they were all pretty upset about this whole thing. Um, okay, so after they declared the United Colonies to be free and independent states, Congress resolved itself into a committee of the whole. That's it. The committee of the whole to read and edit the committee's draft of the Declaration of Independence. So then members rewrote, removed, and corrected several sections of the draft. Okay? So that's what they did. Okay. It's a lot. It's a lot. Okay. Control V. Okay, edit the draft, the community of the whole. Um, members rewrote, removed, and corrected several sections. Then, how did they handle the downside of the crowds? They got rid of all those edits. That's what I think. How did they handle the downside of the crowds? Um, In making their case, the members of Congress used a vocabulary of rights. Safety and happiness, they argued, depend on governments that secure rights. They provided examples, blah, blah, blah. So they were trying to be reasonable. Um, they used specific complaints. Um, okay, so being specific, nothing vague. Okay, they were very specific. We have these issues with you. All right. Were they pursuing voice or influence or both? All right. I think that they use both. Both. Okay. How did they get from voice to change? Um, They got from voice to change by drafting the preamble and the Constitution, which they then acted upon. Okay. Oh, I gotta hit submit. 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 She don't like my short answer, so let me see. I believe that they use voice um, um, and affluence, right? Okay. And then I think that they chose the men that they chose because of their respectability. Okay. Submit. Okay, that one took. How did they find allies? Um, I think that they found allies through the Committee of the Whole. Hmm. Okay. They softened the draft's language in several places and made it less radical. And that way they could elicit more support by not being so, crazy, right? They softened the draft's language and made it less radical. Okay. So Professor has did some annotations. Oh, she's got a lot of them. I'm gonna stop this here because it's already getting to be an hour, and Professor has a lot on here. This is a lot. Mhm. How do we get from voice to change? She is saying, I see. In order to secure influence, the colonists thought about the key functions of government and about how to build them in new institutions. Here they lay out a blueprint for the powers they are claiming. In another document called the Articles of Confederation, they mapped out how they would organize their political institutions to enact those functions. That's how we got all these alphabet groups and agencies. Oh, okay. Let me see. Two replies. Um, the important step was codifying their words into a document that challenged enemies and allies to confront the untenable situation of the colonists and the need to change that. Renata says, in that occasion, I think U.S. had smart people who found it very unfair and promoted a revolution. Today, we can get a voice in two mechanisms. Person appears independently, then it is necessary to analyze why person appeared in the crowd. Or we can produce someone generally a narcissist in terms of psychiatric. I think that they're missing the point. This whole Constitution and preamble was based on a Native American tribe that had their own government set up. Just like the Iroquois Confederacy, the Native American tribes already had a system of government that they used. And the colonists piggybacked on that to create the United States of America, this preamble and the Constitution itself. And it's a damn shame that this isn't mentioned in this class. But I guess for the purposes of civics, they're not including this historical fact. They're including this other historical stuff, but it is what it is. Compare what matters to the authors of the Declaration and why or uh why to why to what matters to you and why. What mattered to the authors of the Declaration was happiness and safety. This these values are important to me as well because it defines the quality of life itself. You can't have a quality of life if you're unsafe or you're sad. You're miserable. Okay, next. I think I'm almost done. Do, 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 do. So I'm done with today's lesson, looks like. Okay. Conclusions. Okay. Okay, so every wicked man is truly miserable. All tyrants are wicked men. So this would mean all tyrants are truly miserable. Submit. Gullo cannot make dinner without flesh and fish. There was no fish to be gotten today, so Gullo cannot make dinner. The fogs vanish as the sun rises, but the fogs have not yet begun to vanish. Thus, the sun has not risen. Um, okay. All right. That's it. That's it for today. Next is um, civic engagement in the constitutional democracy. So I will start on that on Monday. All right. What do you think about this lesson? Huh? What do you think about my answers? I'm tired, y'all. And so, yeah. Leave your comments below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I will talk to you guys later. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.